I think it speaks to the health of American society, that people don't buy into envy and class antagonisms the way the left thinks they do.
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV, and we are talking today with Grover Norquist. He's the president of Americans for Tax Reform and the author most recently of the new book, End the IRS Before It Ends Us: How to Restore a Low-Tax, High-Growth, Wealthy America. Grover, thanks for talking.
Nick, yes.
In the book, you talk about how in 2014, at all levels of government, government consumed 34% of GDP. That's high tax by your, I mean, some people would want it higher, but it's high tax by you. What should that rate be, or how do we know what the right rate is?
In 1774, before we became a country, Americans were paying 1 to 2% of their income in taxes. The British in London were paying 20% in order to oppress us. We were paying 1 to 2%. I want to go closer to 1 to 2,
right,
away from 34. There's no magic number. It's lower. It's less.
But is it always less, or I mean, and in a low tax kind of world, is it that taxes always have to be getting cut to keep growth going, or is it that you can hit a steady state where the government just isn't that big a deal?
If we can bring spending down and tax rates down, it'll be less destructive of economic growth. The most important thing we can do is rein in spending, reform government entitlements so that they cost less over time and that taxes can come down. Look, we need national defense and some courts and so on. Beyond that, government becomes...
And cowboy poetry readings.
Absolutely. And other than that, beyond that, it becomes destructive of human liberty rather than conducive.
When you say end the IRS, both in the title of the book and throughout, I mean, you literally mean getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service as it exists. What is it about that agency that is, you know, that is, other than kind of populist anger, to be put in the title of the book?
There's an intrusiveness. There's a power. It allows the government to get big. I think it allowed our participation in World War I on a massive scale. Instead of defending our coastlines or our shipping, we had this button you could turn. Oh, massive amounts of cash. And Wilson was able to jump into a war that otherwise you'd have had to thought about the costs and how you'd raise the money and so on. So it empowers the government like a switch to go way up. It could come down again, but it just tends to go up and up and up.
I mean, it's a ratchet.
It gives the government too much power and too much control over our lives. And we don't have to have it. For most of our country's history, we didn't have an income tax. In our 50 states, 9 don't have an income tax. I think in the next 15 years, it'll be 25 that don't have income taxes. You're seeing a number of states looking to follow Kansas's model of ratcheting the income tax, personal income tax, down.
Talk a bit about Kansas, because this has been, and of course with states, I mean, most of them only put income taxes in between the late 60s and mid-70s, so they had existed.
It's new. We think it's always been there.
Kansas, generally people say, like, you got to be kidding me, Norquist. Kansas is up the, it's up the river without a paddle in terms of revenues have plummeted and everything's going to hell in a handbasket. What's your rejoinder to that?
Kansas is the future. Kansas is the model. They had 50 years of bipartisan overspending, 50 years of Lincoln Republicans, people who were Republicans because Kansas was with the North during the Civil War, and they haven't thought about it since. They're not Reagan Republicans.
This is the Bob Doles of the world.
They're Republicans because they're born north of the Mason-Dixon line, full stop. It became a Reagan-Republican House, Senate, and governorship only with Brownback's governorship. He turned around and passed a law that phases out the income tax over time. As revenue comes in from economic growth, more than 2%, you ratchet down the income tax. Never ratchet it up, only ratchet it down to zero.
But what about, I mean, they are cutting a lot of spending, and have they cut into bone yet?
Not as much as they need to. Obviously, all the spending interests consider themselves dying.
Is there anything, though, that a place like Kansas, it's a big state, it has no really major city in it. Kansas City is in Missouri. Wichita's the biggest city with 300,000 people. Is there anything that Kansas can do to actually make people want to move there? It's also depopulating.
Well, 2 things. The first thing you do is not make people leave. You actually have seen people move into Kansas across the border from Missouri because they specifically cut taxes on small business, pass-through small businesses. So for a whole bunch of that border, people move a couple blocks in because it's a big deal. Missouri's taxes are way too high.
Well, let's talk about the kind of federal plans that you talk about.
Yeah.
You run through various possible reforms, the fair tax, the flat tax, and what you call the golden triangle of tax reform. The fair tax, define it, and then you're critical of it, although you like the basic idea. What's up with the fair tax?
The fair tax says let's get rid of the income tax completely. And unless you do that with a constitutional amendment, the fair tax is dangerous because it becomes an add-on
and
to the income
it's
tax.
essentially a national sales tax.
Yes.
Yeah.
What it does, it taxes consumed income one time at one rate. Now, you can also do that through a flat tax. You just exempt savings and investment. So both of those get you the right base. Consumed income taxed one time at one rate. Why? One rate means it's very difficult to increase. I'm originally from Massachusetts prior to emigrating to the United States, and we have a flat rate income tax in Massachusetts by Constitution. Tough to raise. Illinois has a flat rate income tax. Tough to raise because you have to look everybody in the state in the eye and say, I've got a great idea, and you're all paying for it. If you divide it with a graduated or progressive income tax, you can mug people one at a time.
Okay, so the fair tax is good because it's flat rate, it's simple, and it taxes income once, which is a big deal.
Yeah.
The idea that dollars shouldn't constantly being taxed again and again until they're shredded. But what's wrong with the fair tax then?
Well, there's strategic questions. If you switched over tomorrow, it wouldn't matter whether you had a flat tax or a fair tax to a 20-year-old, but to a 65-year-old who has paid taxes on their income all their life, now retires and is going to live off their savings, a fair tax taxes all their savings.
Right.
And since older people tend to vote more frequently than younger people, that's a real problem.
Okay, so then let's go to the flat tax.
Yeah.
Talk through your preferred flat tax plan.
You want to go where you exempt all savings and investments. You have a 401k that's infinitely expandable. You pay taxes on consumed income, a flat rate tax, and you want to take that rate as low as you possibly can. You wrestle with spending in order to reduce the rate further and further.
What of any of the flat tax plans that have been brooded about, is one of them better than the other? The Rabushka Forbes plan, or you're not that
I'm
interested
agnostic.
in details?
They're all in the right direction.
Yeah.
I want to go that way.
And again, the idea is that income is taxed, or dollar is taxed once, it's flat, and it's universal.
Correct.
Yeah.
And what you don't, if the government has to come in and tax the same dollar over and over again, they have to follow your bank account, your investments, what's in your basement. It's less intrusive if they watch you once.
Those kinds of privacy concerns work with a certain type of conservative. They work with libertarians. Do they work to convince other, say liberals or political agnostics, who, does it work, or are they just kind of like, hey, where's your tinfoil hat? I'm not seeing it.
No, anyone who pays income taxes and knows the level of detail in which you have to get into. If you've ever done an estate, when you have to know everything, how much gold is in somebody's teeth when they pass away. You have to know all their assets. There's no reason for the government to be that intrusive. It bothers people.
Well, let's talk about what is the what's the triangle of reform that you're interested in kind of pursuing?
Sure. This is sort of what Reagan did. You take the rates down, but you go to full expensing. So instead of long depreciation schedules, you go to full expensing. What does that do? 1,000 pages out of the tax code. You don't have to decide this computer is good for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. If you spend $1, you expense it for equipment, plant and equipment. Tremendous simplification. Tremendously reduces the cost of capital investment. Rates as low as you can, 25 to 20% at the first cut. And then last, territoriality. So the government only steals money that you earn here in the United States. You earn it in France, the French will steal some of it. You can bring what they don't steal back with you.
And this is both for personal income, but especially business income. Talk a little bit about how the corporate income tax, we've had a bunch of scenarios where Burger King moves to Canada, buys Tim Hortons, moves to Canada to avoid a tax bite. Talk about territoriality in the tax code.
Look, territoriality is the way most countries operate. We have a universal tax. The United States government thinks it should be able to tax money you make in Germany. That reduces competition and has allowed our rates to remain high when others have reduced them. What we want to have is a competition.
And it keeps people from bringing money back to the country, right?
Yes.
This is the corporate. There's a reason why Apple is, warehousing servers in Ireland and keeping the money there.
There's $2 trillion worth of American corporate assets overseas that could come back tomorrow if we allowed people ollie in free to bring the money back without taxing it. That's an important first step. I like the competitive part of that, where each country competes to provide the best government at the lowest cost and to keep rates down. You lose that with the universal.
And alternatively, that's true of states in the United States, right?
Yes.
California could say, hey, we're going to have high taxes and high services. Texas, low states, low service, and people can sort.
They do. And for those of us who think smaller government, lower taxes is a better idea, guess what? Most people are with us. People are moving from high tax states to low tax states. The one who want to stay in Vermont, they can stay in Vermont. But what we are seeing is more and more states beginning the process of following Kansas to go to a zero income tax. And we're going to go from 9, I think, up to 20 or 25 in the next 15 years. That's part of educating people that you don't necessarily need a national income tax, as more and more states have no state income tax.
Marco Rubio, Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, Senator Mike Lee of Utah recently came out with a tax plan that gets, it speaks to a lot of the concerns you're talking about. It simplifies, it creates 2 rates for personal income, it changes some depreciation stuff on business. What's your general take on the Rubio Lee plan?
They originally were going to focus more on just raising the deduction or credit per child, which is good for families but doesn't help you on economic growth.
And it actually blows a hole in the budget because they don't pay for it by taking things.
Expensive in terms of expensive to the government.
Right.
But they added to that zeroing out the capital gains tax, almost reducing taxes, all taxes on savings and investment. So it's actually turbocharged on a growth side. So between the two, it's not a bad marriage of 2 ideas.
Well, but I mean, from a kind of fair tax, flat tax point of view, should we be getting rid of deductions like, or you know, deductions for children, deductions for particular types of economic activity? You know, why should the government be saying, no, it's okay that you spend money on medicine or on education as opposed to cars or whatever?
One would prefer to phase that sort of stuff out. And I think on that you have to grow away from those things. If you threaten them somebody and you say, I'm going to do 3 good things for you and do this other thing that threatens you, people are paralyzed by the one that threatens you and they don't see the 3 helpful pieces. So I'm much more into economic growth to move away from some of those challenges.
What is the, you know, you mentioned zeroing out capital gains, and obviously this is something, Bill Clinton didn't actually do that, but he dramatically reduced, or capital gains rates were reduced heavily at the end of his years.
Yeah.
What is it? How do you explain that or justify that or persuade people who are liberal or who think, you know what, that capital gains should be taxed as regular income or even more because they're ill-gotten? What's the argument to get them to see it differently?
Part of it is you're taxing the same dollar a second time. It's like the argument against the death tax. Interestingly, the death tax hits very few people, maybe less than 1% now that it's been pruned back. And yet 70% of the American people today and for the last 30 years have supported getting rid of the death tax. I think it speaks to the health of American society, that people don't buy into envy and class antagonisms the way the left thinks they do. If we could learn to talk about capital gains the way we do talk about the death tax and say, look, you're taxing the same dollar a second or a third time, and this is all savings. Death tax is all savings, capital gains is all savings. You don't want to take savings out of the economy. It's what creates jobs and investment.
Let's talk about kind of federal taxes as a percentage of GDP. Total federal taxes, business, individual, all receipts for the federal government in 2014, according to the tax policy, came to 17.5% of GDP. That is, as a percentage, that is a lower rate than the last 3 years of the budget of the Reagan budget years. Isn't 17.5%? You know, what are we complaining about then?
Spending too much.
Okay, so yeah, and let's talk about spending because you know, roaming around here, and you mentioned entitlement reform, you know, which is really driving spending more than any single other factor. But between 2009 and 2013, the feds borrowed 33 cents of every dollar they spent. It's clear, you know, and revenue was going down. It didn't stop them from spending. Reagan borrowed a hell of a lot of money. You know, it's so, isn't this idea that if we drive tax rates down, we will curtail spending is just clearly wrong from the historical record? And do we need to be worrying less about taxes and more focused on spending? No,
yes, no.
Okay.
If you cut taxes, it does not necessarily discipline spending because the spenders have no objections to deficit spending. They will keep spending if they can do it. Second, if you raise taxes, they will increase spending as much as you raise the taxes and more. Historically, when you raise taxes, they spend it plus in anticipation of you raising taxes again.
But that didn't happen under Bill Clinton, because Bill Clinton did raise taxes early in his career, and then in terms of overall revenue as a percentage of GDP, they were collecting like 20% of the economy at the end of his term, but spending actually flattened or came down a little bit.
Republican House and Senate in '94.
Yeah.
That's what flipped. The growth, the job creation,
Sure.
the stock market was flat for the 2 years when he raised taxes. As soon as the Republicans took
But I
the
am
House and
saying
Senate,
that, I mean, isn't there an argument that if people, I mean, if you raise taxes in order to pay for spending, people recognize that, oh my gosh, government actually costs something. If you can buy, like between 2009 and 2013, if you can buy $1's worth of government spending and you're only paying 67 cents, you're kind of stupid not to say, yeah, you know what, give me more, give me more.
that would work, except there are 300 million people, but each individual has not got the same. Some people are raising taxes, not getting anything at all for it. Right. So it's not quite, it's not some collective decision that we made. When Reagan got elected, he said the Republican Party is the party of tax cuts, which it wasn't before. It's the party of deficits, fighting deficits, which could mean tax increases like Goldwater.
Right.
Gingrich got elected and said, we're the governing majority in this country if we just act properly and be true to ourselves. Oh, really? We can be the majority? You know, we don't have to sort of cheat our way into power because nobody agrees with us. People do agree with us. And then the third change in the Republican Party thinking was the Tea Party. Spending, spending, spending. They took earmarks, which had been seen for 50 years as a sign of virility in a congressman or a senator. I have stolen money from other districts and I bring it back and give it to somebody who lives near you. I brought a brontosaurus, we all eat tonight. This was considered something that was quite heroic that someone did. People would put it in their obituaries about how they brought money back to their district. Now it's like farting at the dinner table. It's like shoplifting. You don't talk about it.
All right, well, we will leave it there. And the new book by Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform is End the IRS Before It Ends Us: How to Restore a Low-Tax, High-Growth, Wealthy America. I look forward to living in that America someday. Thank you, Grover.
Give us a couple weeks.
Thanks so much. For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.